Hey y'all, welcome to episode 16 of Naked Talk with Unprocessed Jess. This is the second episode in our Love Your Labia series. I have shared, if you're new on here, that for the month of February, I wanted to focus on our relationship with our body. And I've talked before in my episode, Vulvas, Vaginas, and Penises, Oh My, some of the misconceptions and shame and just really not talking about our bodies and their functions and how we need to start talking about that. So I'm super excited to bring our next guest on for our Love Your Labia series. It's Kim Vopni, and she is known as a Vagina Coach. And we connected on Instagram, and I've been following her ever since and learning a thing or two along the way. I shared in the last episode how I'm a 42-year-old woman, mother of 3, and I just learned recently, a couple years ago, that everything's not your vagina down there. Apparently there's a vulva and there's a clitoris and all kinds of good stuff going on down there. So I'm going to keep sharing the message because I know it's been great for me. So we're here. If you have not subscribed, you can go to find me at Naked Talk with Unprocessed Jess on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, where you get your podcast. And I'll post some links if you missed it after that. And make sure you subscribe because then you'll know when a new episode comes out. If you're anything like me, I love consuming content that's great and useful, but I'm always on the go and busy. So it really helps when I see something saying, hey, there's a new episode, click and play, and I'm good. I've shared before that I live outside of Houston, so I do a lot of driving around here. So be sure that you check that out. If you're joining us on Facebook, I'm glad that you're here, and we'll be sharing more of these to come. So make sure that you have your notifications on for that. So this episode is sponsored by the Vagina Coach, and she'll be sharing a little bit more later, but she's also she co-founded Bellies Inc. and the Ab Wrap. And so I have shared before, if you've been on my blog for a while, you know that I share about holistic health, and that's really important to me. And I so wish I would have had this information when I had my 3 girls. And a lot like our last guest, Anna, Bastidas, where she's taken a really good stance on body positivity, and also she's created her breastfeeding friendly bikinis. I want to share this so other moms can benefit from that and anything to make it easier, right? Helps. So go on there. She's got some great programs she's going to talk about more, but the Kegel Mojo is something really cool. And then I think it's called Prepare to Push. And which can be great as well. So without further ado, we have Kim Vopni, the Vagina Coach, and she's a certified fitness professional. She's really passionate about spreading this information. She's a published author and a women's health educator, and she's going to share a little bit more about how she's helping women and really making a difference in their lives. So welcome, Kim, to Naked Talk with Unprocessed Jess.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm in the right place if you're talking about vulvas and labias, and you've got lips on your shirt. So,
Yeah, I thought this would be perfect for our series. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So let us know a little bit about what made you so passionate about pelvic floor health in the first place. And was there a certain moment that made you say, wait a minute, either you didn't know it or not, this isn't common knowledge and more people need to know?
Yeah, so I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a pelvic floor evangelist or anything like that. But if I look back, I always was fascinated by birth in sort of a fear and fascination blend. I saw a video, I think it was in 6th grade, that was talking about birth, and it showed us what was happening. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm never, ever going to do that. And then I kept looking at my mom thinking, well, she did it and my grandma did it and all these other, people do it. But I just don't think that's for me. And so I sort of grew up thinking I'm just not having children and not going there. But obviously I got older and decided I did want to start a family. And then it became about educating myself. And I was really fortunate to have seen my sister-in-law give birth. And she used a midwife, and she was in a position that I had never seen somebody birth in before. And it was really eye-opening for me, because at that point, all I had was that 6th grade video and what I had seen in the media, which is very much women on their back screaming. And so that changed. I had already made a decision that, yes, I did want to start a family, but that really opened my eyes to how birth could be done differently. And so the following year, I was pregnant, and I was taking everything that I had started to teach I wasn't teaching myself, but learning and absorbing from other people. And the pelvic floor was really a big piece for me. I didn't understand how babies came out of such a small space and women carried on. And then I did know that my mom had bladder challenges, and she had tummy challenges, she had back pain, she stopped running, all these things. And I thought, I'm a very active person, and I really want to be doing those things. And should I opt for a cesarean birth instead? And, so I went down all of these different paths of what should I do. And my midwives, so I was using midwives, and my midwives pointed me to a product called the Epino, which was a biofeedback device for pelvic floor training. And it helps women connect with their pelvic floor, but also learn how to, I will say, yield and surrender. And even in the presence of stretch and pressure and discomfort, how can you soften and find ease? So there's less likely of babe coming through really tight tissue and tearing. And so I used this product. I had a great experience. I decided I wanted to tell more people. And at that point, so that was kind of, maybe you could say that was the TSN turning point for me. But at the time, it wasn't really that, oh, I'm going to start a business. I said, I just want to tell more people about this. And I thought I'll have it as a side thing, and I'll sell a few and make a few extra dollars, kind of thing. And that's really what started it. So I contacted the company. They're in Germany. I started selling. I think I bought 3 or 5 or something the very first time, and started to network through midwives. And I was still working full time. I was working in human resources, and I had sort of made a decision or a realization that we had moved to, I'm in BC, but we had moved to Ontario for my husband's work, and I was working full time. I had both my kids in daycare, and we had no family there. My husband is a pilot, so he's away all the time. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm waking up early, dropping my kids, working, coming home, making dinner, putting them to bed. This isn't for me. And I wonder if I can do something with this product and make it a business. So I had said, I'll give myself a year to grow it. 3 months later, I got laid off. So I said, okay, I'm going to try to grow it now. And that was kind of the start. So that was 2009. It was 10 years ago. And I started, anybody who was going to listen to me about pelvic floor health. And I recertified. I had been a fitness professional before human resources, so I recertified all of that, really focused on the pre-postnatal niche. And then I started to have pelvic floor physiotherapists referring to me, and I had never heard of a pelvic floor physiotherapist at that point. And so a few of them who were recommending people to come to me for the Epino, I said, hey, I'd like to come and meet you and figure out what you do. And so I sat down with them and learned very early on how grossly underserved women are, especially when they become pregnant and beyond. And that was really where I said, oh my gosh, like this, you professionals need to be, I need to scream about you from the rooftops. Everybody needs to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist. And that's kind of what started it. And then, I started adding more products to my repertoire, I guess you could say. And then I started the Prepare to Push program. That was my first one. And that was later 2009 as a way to educate again, do a workshop and teach people better birthing positions, better recovery strategies, pushing what is the pelvic floor, what is diastasis, how are the two connected. And so that's kind of how it started. And then over the last 10 years, it's kind of been an evolution. I met Sam and Julia from my two partners in Bellies Inc. We met in 2010 and we formed that business in 2011 with a similar mission, but we were really focused on the abdominal wall. So we were recognizing the link between diastasis and the pelvic floor. Julia is a pelvic floor physiotherapist herself. And so we were trying to, again, bring the information to women beforehand. So they weren't saying, why didn't anybody tell me about this? Like you just said, I wish I'd known about this. And now it's just, it's been kind of an evolution. And I will tell anybody who will listen to me, and sometimes even people that don't listen to me, I still tell them about pelvic health, but that's kind of how it started. That was the evolution.
Yeah, and one thing I think that I've learned I began blogging a little bit over 8 years ago as a new mom, then as a new mom with toddlers, and I had discovered what GMOs were, genetically modified organisms, and was horrified and thought, well, wait a minute, I don't understand, how can these things be happening, and then I learned to read labels, and I also was homeschooling at the time. So I started that as a way, just like you said, I just want to get the information out there, whether it was about homeschooling or it was just starting a health journey, how to read labels and just really take control of your health, but then also sharing my journey and knowing that it's not good to be scared, but you need to be able to be aware and take control and know your options, right? And that's something that, as I was listening to your story, a lot like entrepreneurs, we don't usually start out the way we end up. It takes an evolution and it just changes. And it changes with your seasons of life. And then you see, hey, people really need to know this. I just posted yesterday on one of my platforms that things that I take for granted now, 8 years into my health journey, people still don't know. So I had posted something about something in food or just a very basic takeaway, and this girl ended up like sending me messages and like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this, and I'm excited, and we're reading labels and I'm helping my husband. So I think just one thing that's so great about becoming an entrepreneur, and like you said, there's different things out there. We just want people to know their options, right? But it's so great because you make it fit your lifestyle, and then you share that message for the ones who they may not need it, but maybe they'll say, oh my gosh, the Vagina Coach, go see her or look her up. Same for my message. It's not for everybody, and that's okay. But so I love that. And I'd also mentioned last episode, I'm wanting to do another episode on my podcast, and I'm going to call it the Babe Series, Bear All Business Edition, and more talk about little things with entrepreneurs because it's just interesting. All areas of our life are connected and they affect the other. And I loved how hearing you're on your journey of this, how you see, okay, there's the abdominal wall, there's the pelvic floor. It's not just this really large baby coming out of a small hole and a bunch of crying, which there's usually screaming, and pain involved, or there can be, but we need to learn all about it and just have that information. So I love what you're doing. And like you said, I didn't have any of this when I had my first child. And that's a different topic. We touched a little on it last episode, but I wanted to try breastfeeding, but I knew no one who did. My mom hadn't nursed, any of my family that I knew. And I just wanted to know my options. And back then, that was 15 years ago now when I had my first daughter, but it was so hard to find things. So I love that there's people sharing this and make it where a woman can go on there and Google something, start searching. I know there's something called a Kegel, but I don't know. And you'll be there to help. So, and to your response real quick about the pelvic floor physio, or what is a physiotherapist?
In the States, you refer to them as physical therapists. In Canada, we refer to them as physiotherapists. Same thing.
So I had never heard about that. And really, I just now am starting to have friends who've had babies more recently say that they have them. So yes, there's still a lot more people to reach. So I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about something that I know caught my attention when I started following you on Instagram was the Kegels. So I know there's a lot of misconception, at least in my experience and from ladies I've spoken with or heard from, that you kind of know what a Kegel is and you kind of squeeze down there and hold, but then I'm finding it's not as easy as that. There's a technique to it. And I kind of think of it like in fitness. It's, yes, you can just say, go work out. Well, it's a little bit more, detailed than that. So maybe start with maybe a broad sense of what actually the pelvic floor is. And then maybe some general misconceptions or things that we need to know.
Yeah, for sure. So the pelvic floor is essentially the group of muscles that closes off the base of the pelvis. So in our pelvis, we have bones and we have joints. And if you can think about where your tailbone is, that's the base, the furthest part of your spine, basically the end of your spine. So the tailbone is one attachment point for the muscles. The other in the front would be your pubic. People call it the pubic bone. It's actually a joint at the front. So the front attachment would be the pubic joint. And then if you are ever sitting on your bum and somebody says, pull your butt cheeks apart and find your sit bones. So most people sit more on their tailbone, but if you kind of nod your pubic joint forward and come onto those sit bones, you'll know what I'm talking about. Those are the other attachment points. So it's kind of like a bit of a diamond shape. And so one misconception is that it's one muscle, but it's actually layers of muscles. And there's a lot of, there's a huge blood supply. There's a lot of nerves that come into the pelvis. And the functions of the pelvic floor are many. One is because of those attachment points on the base of the spine and on the other points in the pelvis, it plays a role in our pelvic and spinal stability. It plays a role in our decision-making, I call it. So do I need to pee? Do I need to fart? Do I need to poo? And can I tell the difference between those? And then can I control if it's not an optimal time to do it? So sometimes people have a hard time distinguishing, especially between a poo and a fart. And so you want to be able to recognize which one is it, and is it an appropriate time for me to eliminate? And if not, can I hold it? So we want to be able to make those decisions and then have the control. The pelvic floor also helps keep our organs in place. So our internal organs like the bladder, the uterus, the rectum mainly. And when they start to shift out of alignment, that would be considered pelvic organ prolapse. And the other side is sexual satisfaction or lack thereof. So all of these functions are important and integral to so many parts of our life. And most of the time when things are working optimally, we don't think about it, or we don't really pay attention. And then if something ever starts to go amiss, and it's tied, a lot of things like even back pain, hip pain, knee pain, a lot of it can be tied directly to the pelvic floor. And then all of a sudden it becomes one of the only things we can think about because it's so central to so many things in our life. So if we're leaking urine, that affects our life. If we have organ prolapse, that affects our life. And we may not enjoy sex as much, but we may also not be having sex because we're ashamed or we think we might be leaking. And so there's a whole cycle of, what's the chicken and the egg in there, but incredibly important stuff. And really it deserves a lot more attention than it gets. So the pelvic floor muscles, when we are moving in varied ways, generally we don't really, at the end of the day, we shouldn't really have to do Kegels per se. Now, I say that with a little bit of, I do think that there is a place for intentional Kegels, even if we do have varied movement through our life. But when we are moving optimally through the day and doing all sorts of different things rather than sitting hunched over at a desk most of the day, which is what many of us do, the pelvic floor goes through its normal cycles of movement with our breath. And it's used, like squatting, for instance, is a huge pelvic floor, great for the pelvic floor, but very few of us do it. So when we think of the Kegel exercise, it's a voluntary contraction, and there should be a lift, and then there should be a letting go. And what's happened over time is people think harder is better. People think I've got to squeeze the hell out of my vagina. They've lost the element of the lift or the letting go. So Dr. Kegel invented this or created this exercise, and he used a biofeedback device to help women see. It was called a perineometer. And essentially when they would contract their pelvic floor, they could see on a gauge if they were contracting or not, and then if they could let go. So that's how it was designed for women after childbirth who were having some challenges recruiting their pelvic floor. He gave them biofeedback, taught them how to do it, and that's where it all began. But over time, like I said, it's kind of, people have lost the intention behind it, or the execution hasn't been ideal. And also no one's really teaching pelvic health. If most of people will see medical professionals, and with all due respect to the medical profession, they have a very short window of time to see their patients, and they have to rule out so many kind of life-threatening things that they often don't have the time to spend teaching a Kegel. They may give the advice, go home and do them, but we really need more than that. So the way I teach a Kegel, and there's really, at the end of the day, the best way would be to go get assessed by a pelvic floor physiotherapist, so they can help you determine that. But you also have your own biofeedback. You have your own fingers. you have a partner who has fingers, or maybe they have a penis, and that can be feedback as well. So you can learn how to do them with the feedback from yourself or your partner. And essentially, if you can imagine, let's say we do have fingers inserted into our vagina. And if you can imagine, the Kegel is essentially almost like a gentle hug. It's like the vagina is gently hugging those fingers, a gentle drawing upwards, and then a letting go. And when I teach it as the core breath. And so I coordinate it with breathing. So essentially what happens when we take a breath in, our pelvic floor is lengthening and kind of expanding, or I say blossoming, blossom your vulva. So if you can imagine, if you're sitting, and I get people ideally sitting in a more neutral pelvis on those sit bones and have your vulva on the surface of the chair that you're sitting on. When you inhale, you want to try to bring your attention to your pelvic floor and see, can you feel a sense of fullness? Can you feel like your vulva is blossoming open? And then when you exhale, that's when that fullness will leave. And when you add on a voluntary contraction now, then we should get that contract and lift. So cues like picking up a blueberry with your vagina and your anus on your exhalation, sipping a milkshake through a straw with your vagina on your exhalation. Some people think about a jellyfish. So the inhalation is when the jellyfish is soft and floaty, and then the exhale is when the edges of the jellyfish propel up to the surface of the ocean. So there's no best cue. It's what's best for that person doing that exercise. And use your fingers, use your partner, and see which one works best for you. Which one do you connect with the most? Some people find, they say, okay, well, I'm doing that, but I don't feel anything. I don't feel like there's a lift. I don't feel like there's a contraction. Sometimes there can be some disconnect there for many reasons, which I'll talk about in a second, but sometimes it can also be simply that there's stuck tension there. And if we don't relieve that tension first, it's kind of like if I was to walk around with my with my arm bent kind of in a bicep curl most of the time for most of my day, my bicep muscle, my arm muscles are going to become tired, and they also can't generate as much force here. I don't have as much room to contract as I do when I'm down here. So the same thing happens in the pelvic floor. If it's been kind of stuck and holding on to tension and it's already shortened, so to speak, if I'm asking it to shorten more, it's kind of like, I don't have any more to give. So we need to make sure we let go of the tension first. So that can be a real eye opener for people when we focus more on the release work first. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've just given the opportunity of that muscle now to go through its full contract, relax cycles. Does that make sense?
Yes, it really does. And I think you can apply that to a lot of things in life, especially when you said like working out. You know, I love fitness. I love trying all different things. And earlier on in my fitness journey, the same thing. I thought if I just do 2 classes a day, I'll really be fit. And to the point of where sometimes you're self-sabotaging yourself. So I think that's good to know. And I like how you said it's so important to have someone who that is what they do and they can take the time, because we're all, like I say, every body is different, in our needs. And so where can they go to find, did you say a pelvic floor physical therapist? Do you have, I think on your site you have a resource, don't you, to find one, but is that in Canada or is that in the US as well?
It's starting to broaden into the US. So it was very Canada-centric to start out with.
Okay.
So in Canada, if you go to vaginacoach.com and click on Find a Physio, it's there. But also if you're in the US, try there first, because there's a lot more people from the US who are becoming listed on there as well. They can also check out the APTA, which is the American Physical Therapy Association. It's .org, and you can click on find a therapist, I think they say. And then you would click on women's health. So women's health physical or physiotherapist. But you want to make sure, because there are people who may call themselves women's health physiotherapists who don't necessarily do the internal piece. So you want to make sure that who you find is licensed to do the internal assessment and treatment. And the other place you can go is pelvicguru.com. She is a pelvic floor physiotherapist out of Orlando, and she's also building out a listing of professionals as well. So those are 3 places where you can go. And you typically don't need, in Canada, you don't need a referral. unless your insurance requires it. So if your insurance requires that you have a referral, then obviously go get one. But other than that, you can just call and book an appointment and be prepared, because some people do have very significant wait lists. And that's why I would say, especially for pregnant women, see somebody when you're pregnant, but also pre-book your 6-week postpartum follow-up session. So get that, if your due date is March 1st, then go 8 weeks. So generally, what would that be? May 1st, say.
Okay.
Book it now before, so then you don't have to wait another 6 or 8 weeks because they have a wait list. And it's also, when you're a new mom, the last thing you're going to be doing is calling and making other appointments for yourself. You focus then on the babe. So at least get it into the calendar. But honestly, in my opinion, they're the most underused women's health resource that we have. And I always say that every woman should see one, and see one annually, even if you have no symptoms.
Yeah, that's good. And we're running out of time. I'm gonna have you on here again, because there's so many things I wanted to ask about your ab wrap. If you're on, watching us on Facebook, go to Kim's site, and she has a video on there I was watching, and I love that it's a holistic approach. But also the Prepare to Push, I think would be great for expecting moms that are listening or watching, because once again, it's getting that information on there. But I want to real quickly, we have a few more minutes, but I want to ask, so when you brought up that question, or when you were talking about being pregnant, I've had people that were posting questions saying, well, what if my oldest child's 12? Is this something we still need to do? And I would say yes, because we still have a pelvic floor, 100%. and we want to do that. So I think that's something to say it's not just related with a baby, or it's everyone with a pelvic floor can probably benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never too late. And even if you have never been pregnant or never given birth, there's lots of influences that change the function or can influence the function of the pelvic floor. So every woman, yes, regardless of what stage of life, regardless of if you've had children or not, everybody should see one, in my opinion.
Thank you. And you touched on a little bit about how it is related to to sex, and that's what they were saying. Does this have to do with poor sex health? And I would say it's all related, and then everyone's different, and they'd have to look into that. Someone else said as well, what is the relationship of pelvic floor health and diastasis recti?
Yep. So diastasis, or diastasis, some people pronounce it, is essentially, the term diastasis itself means separation, and recti is talking about the two rectus muscles. So if you think about the two six-pack muscles that everybody's trying to get. Yeah. And in the middle of the two rectus muscles is a band of connective tissue called the linea alba. The rectus are never fused together. There's always a gap there. So the term diastasis, like separation, is a bit misleading, because there is always a separation there. But the internet has kind of created a bit of a frenzy, because people are like, oh my gosh, I've got a gap, and how do I close the gap? And early on, when I was talking about this initially, 10, 12 years ago, it was very focused on the gap, and really there was hardly any research. And that's kind of what people became obsessed with. Over time, and as more research has happened, we're recognizing that nobody has ever determined what is considered a normal distance, like the interrecti distance, they call it. Nobody's ever determined what is normal. So first of all, that's a really good indicator that maybe it doesn't really matter that much. And it's about the tension in that connective tissue. So somebody's rectus could be further apart than, maybe what would be considered normal, which is closer to the midline. But if they do have the ability to generate and maintain tension in that connective tissue, then it doesn't affect their function. Whereas somebody might have not very much of a gap, but they aren't able to generate that tension or maintain it in movement, and they start to get that doming. It's kind of like a little pup tent along the midline, or they might notice pressure when they do certain exercises, or their tummy won't flatten, all sorts of things. Then that is more a sign of the condition, like the challenges behind the condition. But the two straps of the rectus attach onto the front of the pelvis, onto that pubic joint. So when there is weakness or stretching or tissue that's not working optimally up above, it's going to directly influence what's happening in the pelvis. And then vice versa, the pelvic floor is what when it's coordinated ideally in the core, it tensions the transversus abdominis, which wraps around us like a corset, and it influences that linea alba. And it's what essentially is where we get that creating and maintaining a tension is from the pelvic floor. So there's no magic exercise that will fix or close a diastasis, but you have to have the pelvis and the pelvic floor optimized in order to be able to generate and maintain that tension.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to see, I can reach out to you too. And because I have other questions and I know people are going to have questions after seeing this, maybe we can answer them on the Unprocessed Just Facebook page and also on Instagram. Maybe I'll just post questions on there. And I'd love to have you back too, because there's so many things I'm thinking of now. You know, the ab wrap is amazing. I'm just thinking of all these things I wish I had learned and still need to know, right? So, yes, thank you so much for joining us, Kim. And be sure y'all check her out at the Vagina Coach. And she's on Instagram and Facebook. And she's also under Bellies Inc. And how do you pronounce your wellness? Is it Pelvian?
Well, Pelvian Wellness is that's the official business name of Vagina Coach. But
so Vagina Coach and Bellies Inc. You can find her there. And then be sure to go onto her site, vaginacoach.com, and look at her programs. I think it's really will be helpful, especially as you're starting your journey to connect all those dots to find people in person who can help as well. And if you're listening on Facebook and watching, if you have not gone to Naked Talk with Unprocessed Jess, go on there, subscribe. We have lots of vulva, vagina, sex talk, a little bit of everything. We really just want to start these conversations so you can take what you need and continue on your journey. So we will see you next week. And I have my gynecologist on, Dr. Noelle Boyd, and she'll be answering those embarrassing questions that you don't want to ask, but you really need to. So send in your questions and we'll see you next time.